Here we go. We're up to the Minnesota Wild. So I'm over halfway through the league at this stage as we get up to Minnesota. And where's this team at? Now, I was thinking about it when I was putting this together. I thought if this team doesn't point out the parity in the NHL, I don't know which one does. You can find some weaknesses on this team, but you can find some strengths. If you want to say this team isn't going to be any good next year, you can find reasons to say that. If you want to say, you know what, they have a chance to move right back up the standings and be one of the better teams in the Central, you can say that as well. Parity's really a thing, and that's why I'm not making any guesses on what's going to happen next season, because we have no idea. We have to go through a draft, we have to go through free agency, any trades that might happen in between. Roster freezes are still in effect, so nothing's happening until we find out something from somebody. But I'll be making videos until then. So, when you look at the Minnesota Wild, the first thing that you have to mention is they have $65.3 million spent for next season. Not a horrible total when you look at the guys who are expiring. Koivu, it's probably his last season. We may have seen him play his last game, which would be sad if that was the case, but it looks like this is probably his last season. Alex Galchenyuk, he's not going to command the amount of money that he was making this season, but I don't know what he's looking for. I'm really, really worried the Canucks are going to put in a big offer for him. That's been a concern of mine because he's been tied to the Canucks a couple of times. He and Wayne Simmons are two guys that may very well get targeted by the Canucks this summer. I would actually like to see Galchenyuk stay with Minnesota because he seemed to have some sort of an affinity for whatever the Minnesota Wild are doing. It seemed to help him. He was much better in Minnesota than he was in Pittsburgh before the trade. Christian Soucy is UFA this summer as well, and I would think it's in the best interests of both team and player to make sure that this relationship works, that they can stay together. RFAs, you've got Luke Cunnin. How much is he worth? Jordan Greenway, how much is he worth? He gets arbitration. Nico Sturm, who's been in the minors, so not going to get a huge raise there. He has arbitration rights as well. And Kaapo Kakkonen. Now, Kakkonen has arbitration rights. He probably doesn't get a big raise, but he probably makes more money than the goaltender that was kind of saving their bacon this year. If you're looking for the best contract, it is Alex Stalock. $785,000 is what they're paying for Stalock, and they've got him locked up for 2 more years. It's almost criminal. It really is. It's almost criminal that for the next 2 years they get Stalock. If he keeps playing the way he was playing this year for $785,000, yeah, I think they'll take that. Again, for Stalock, he got some certainty by staying in Minnesota, but not the money. Nope. I think Austin Matthews makes that just for shaving off his mustache. I think he'd make $785K just for that. And Stalock, $785,000 for 2 more years, which takes some of the sting out of the worst contracts. And I was trying to figure out. So between Parise and Suter, now they've tried to move Parise, and apparently there was a deal that was almost in place with the Islanders. They couldn't figure out the financials, so how much money Minnesota was going to retain in the deal. Now, to me, I think Parise's the worst contract of the two because they're both 35 years of age. Both contracts go till 2025, but Suter is a defenseman, and defensemen will usually play later than forwards. They usually play till they're older. But both contracts are still pretty bad. That's $15 million locked up in these two guys who are both 35 years of age currently, so that's problematic. Victor Rask, though, I couldn't let him off the hook at $4 million for 2 more years. That's a combined, $19 million they're paying for Parise, Suter, and Rask. So that's a problem, and that's why Bill Guerin was working on getting rid of Parise. I think they probably resume their talks this summer. Once we know what's happening, that's when Lou Lamoriello decides he's going to go get Parise. And he knows Zach Parise, so if he can pick him up, Lou Lamoriello knows what he's getting, and it would be another scoring forward for the New York Islanders. And again, if they find a way to split the difference, so Minnesota's retaining some money, it works. Which would just leave then Suter on the books. But I don't think there's any pressure to move Suter. So again, both contracts equally bad, signed at the same time, same age. They both go to Minnesota. It was seen as this really grand thing, and then it didn't quite work out that way. So again, $65 million. If they find a way to move some of Suter's money, that means they have, or not Suter's, Parise's money. That gives them more money to spend, potentially on these guys, or they could go out and get a free agent. They're in a position where if they wanted to, they could. And of course, they're going to be looking ahead to the Seattle expansion, because it looks like they'll have to expose at least one pretty darn good defenseman that Seattle would be quite happy to pick up. And Minnesota might have to do what they did when Vegas came in, make a trade to hold on to players, where they don't want to lose the guy that's exposed, so they'll trade somebody else and maybe add in a draft pick in order to keep the guy. I know that GM said they won't do it again. They're totally going to do it again. There's no way they don't do it again. You have to. It's just that's part of expansions, is that you have to make deals with expansion teams not to take certain players. And it goes back almost as far as expansion goes. I want to say the 67 expansion, we probably saw it too, but I don't have the actual date on that, but it probably happened as well. Expansion draft considerations. And again, if you look at it and say, well, the player we lose, yeah, we don't want to lose him, but the guy we would lose in the expansion draft instead, if we don't make this deal, is far more important. That's how you look at it. Now, Rookie Watch is interesting for Minnesota in that there's a couple of names I wanted to throw out there who I know aren't going to be playing for them this year. Now, Kirill Kaprizov, it looks like Kaprizov's coming over. Kaprizov, and everything that I've read, it sounds like he's going to sign with Minnesota and he's going to come over and play for them this year. And that could be huge because he's going to come over on an entry-level contract. So for a team that doesn't, have to worry too much about money, that means they've got a potential superstar forward coming in on a dime. And if he is truly as good as he looks like he is, I think in Future Watch, I think they had him at number 1. I think he was number 1. The overall rankings, he's 1 or 2. But yeah, Kaprizov, if he's as good as he looks, Minnesota's going to be in good shape because they were kind of a slow team to watch this year. It was kind of hard to watch them because it was kind of sort of boring. So maybe that changes too with a change behind the bench and a change in the leadership at the general manager's level that happened last offseason. Maybe we start to see a more exciting Minnesota Wild team, and maybe Kaprizov can be part of that as well. Now, Matt Boldy is still in the NCAA. He hasn't signed. So as far as I can see, Matthew Boldy, at the earliest he's going to be a Minnesota Wild member is next year. He seems to be progressing very well. Now, if he joins the team, not this coming season, but the year after, again, you're looking at another young player who's talented and could very well be there on an entry-level contract and could be a steal at that. Kalen Addison, it looks like he's progressing well enough. When Bill Guerin brings him in, he brings him in knowing him from the Pittsburgh organization and with the idea of, okay, I know what this player is and what he can do. And so it is quite likely that Addison at least gets a look. But as a young defenseman, it's far more likely that a young defenseman spends some time in the American League before coming up. Maybe we'll start seeing more of that than what we've seen in recent years. Again, in recent years, it's been strange because we've seen a lot of young defensemen come up and just get a shot right out of the gate. But we've also seen some struggles, and maybe some of those players that have struggled with that might lead more GMs to say, all right, we're going to put these young guys in the minors. It's interesting, though, because then it leads to a discussion that I think is baffling, which is like Evan Bouchard in Edmonton. Well, is he a flop? Well, no. You just had to play in the American League, and he's a defenseman, so it's not that unusual. But again, we'll see what they do with Addison. And then Vladislav Firstov, who's in the NCAA. Look, with the last name Firstov, and it being close enough to Firstov, this kid has to make the NHL. So he's in the NCAA. He's not going to make the team this year. He has to be a member of the Minnesota Wild. Just so I can say, okay, Firstov, pretty good player. Just so I can have that moment every time that Minnesota, every review and preview for Minnesota, I can say, okay, now Firstov. Now, unfortunately, there isn't also a player who's Secondov or Secondly. So if there was like Balky Secondly out of Slakovia, something like that, that would be nice. Now there's people who are going to make that player in NHL 20. Love you guys. But yeah, that's something that I'd like to see as Firstov and Secondly as his line mate. But all kidding aside, he needs to make it. That needs to be a thing. So the Minnesota Wild, I think, are in decent enough shape. This year, 35, 27, and 7 at the time of the pause. Last year, 37, 26, 36, and 9, I should say. So 1 game above 500 last year, 8 games above 500 at the pause this year. 45, 26, and 11 in 2017, 2018 for 101 points. So not as bad as last year, not as good as the year before that. But I do think there's a reason for positivity if you're a fan of the Minnesota Wild. I think things are going to get better. But again, we're in a time of tremendous parity. And I think picking who's in and who's not in the playoffs this coming summer, once we know all of this stuff and what's going to happen, and then what could happen next year, good luck. I think it's going to be really, really tough to pick who are in and who aren't in the playoffs this coming summer. So, and sadly, I've got a channel where I kind of have to do that every year. So maybe I just roll dice and, okay, all right, we can do that. I've actually got a game where it's got all the team logos on dice, so I could just roll the dice and, okay, well, the dice say these teams are going to make the playoffs. That's actually a really good idea. I should totally do that. And then we should see, are the dice right or the hockey guy? And then if the dice are right, the following year I could just say, okay, well, the dice say this, and then I just totally abdicate all responsibility for them being right or wrong to the dice. All right, let me know if you're a Minnesota Wild fan. Are you excited about the upcoming season? Did you think that this team was capable of maybe making a run at the end of this year and maybe getting in? Was this a team that was going to fall out of the running at the end of the season? And how do you feel about the future? And when Kaprizov comes over, just how good is he going to be? Let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Remember, stay home, stay safe, wash your hands. Thanks so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.